Hi, thank you for joining us today on our popular podcast series, Gesher Galicia Today. We are thrilled to have with us Elizabeth Bellak and her daughter, Alexandra. Elizabeth was born Ariana Spiegel in 1930 in the former lands of Galicia, now southeast Poland, and is a Holocaust survivor. Her sister Renia was 6 years older and was murdered in 1942 by the Germans. Renia wrote a diary that ended up in the hands of her boyfriend Sigmund, who years later in New York gave it to Renia's mother. Upon their mother's passing, Elizabeth took possession of the diary but filed it in the safe deposit box, where it languished for decades because she could not bear to read it. Years later, Elizabeth's daughter, Alexandra, impressed upon her mother how important that diary was. Elizabeth agreed, and Alexandra had it translated and then published into what is now a best-selling book. This podcast is being recorded on Friday, April 24th. I think it's apropos to do this recording today, which is the day after Yom HaShoah. This diary is much different from a Holocaust memoir, which we are all familiar with. As the noted historian and former special envoy to fight anti-Semitism, Deborah Lipstadt, wrote in the foreword, memoirs are the voices of those who survived, not those who did not. Diaries are contemporaneous accounts. Simply put, the author of the memoir knows the end of the story. The diarist does not. The diarist may well be unaware of the bigger picture of what she is experiencing. For example, is the creation of a ghetto in her town part of a broader policy of ghettoization or just something happening where she is? Renia's story was written up in the March 2025 issue of the Galiciana. I am Stephen Turner, the president of Gesher Galicia. Thank you, Elizabeth and Alexandria, for being here today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alexandra, it was you that first realized the value of this journal. What were you thinking when you first read it?
Well, my name is Alexandra Renata, and I was named after this beautiful and talented person that I was never able to meet because unfortunately she was brutally killed just shy of her 18th birthday by the Nazis. So originally the motivation for translating the diary was to discover who my aunt was, what was she like, what was her life like, what could she teach me about my past. After I read the diary, I realized that this was a historical document that needed to be shared with the world. And even scholars and historians alike have said that Renia was a promising literary talent. There's a professor at Columbia who's a Slavic studies professor who said that Renia's diary is not just a primary historical source of the Holocaust, but a true and outstanding work of literature. So knowing this made it that much more difficult for me because I realized what kind of life she could have had, what kind of contribution she could have made, her and many like her. So I realized this was such an important historical document that needed to be shared and not just kept in a bank vault for 70 odd years.
That's Elizabeth. Can
Yes.
you describe your sister? Did you know she was writing a diary?
Did you know she was writing a diary?
No. I used to say to her, Renia, what you doing? You're writing. She says, I'm doing my homework. So I never knew where she kept it, the book. It was like a notebook, big notebook of 700 pages. But she must have kept it either under the bed or under the pillow. I never saw it before.
Can you describe her?
Well, she was very quiet girl. She was totally different from me. She was very pensive. She was very literary, interesting. She was wanting to go to France where my uncle lived. And she wanted to be a writer, and she was hoping to be a great writer and famous. And guess what's happening? Now she's famous. She's
Well,
in
her
24
talent,
different languages.
right? Her talent is amazing, and especially for someone her age. And I'm going to read passages from the diary during the course of this podcast, but it's just truly remarkable for what she was going through, and the prose and her way with words was truly remarkable. Now, Alexandra, did it take a lot of convincing of your mother to get this diary translated and published?
We're so lucky to have Moya Mamusha, my mother, here with us today because she was so reluctant to tell her story as she harbored such dark secrets that were simply too difficult to tell. But she is here with us, and she's here, she's vibrant, and there are so few survivors left, and even fewer who have the energy and capacity to do these things. But she realized the depth and of this
Important.
diary, that an importance that she had to actually get it published. She realized that it now had new value, and she wanted to recognize her sister, a sister who in many ways acted like a mother figure for her.
Now, this diary focuses a lot on Zygmunt, who was Renia's boyfriend, and he took control of the diary. How and when did he find you and deliver it to you?
Uh, the interesting part was we were living on the west side, that's in the early 50s. And I don't know how he found my mom. Now, he was already a doctor now. He worked for the Air Force. And then he came to New York. Somehow he found, we lived on the first floor, and there he was. Zygmunt, because my mother didn't see him much. I saw him all the time because he used to come to the house. So, I don't know where he hid that diary. We never asked him, so stupid. You don't ask people. He handed my mother this diary. She knew that she wrote the diary somehow because she was writing to my mother. They were very close. But I never knew it. And now suddenly there was this diary. So my mother was too upset about it. She put it in the vault and never read it, and actually never wanted to talk about the past. You could never hear what she would say, never hear about the past. So the diary was there dormant for so many years till my daughter decided what it was. It was so well written because my grandmother, Anna, used to send my sister to this Professor Yershina extra after school. He was a professor of Polynistiki, and he was a great famous man. And he would work with her and so on. So, when you read her Polish story, she writes such beautiful high Polish. You wouldn't know it at such a young girl.
Right, right. Now, for those watching this podcast on YouTube, I want to point out that that is your sister Renia's picture on the wall over your right shoulder, Elizabeth. And
Oh,
There
there,
she is.
there it
There
is.
she is.
Yeah, and just if you read the diary, and I advise all people to do that, just to see that picture and to see her smile puts a face on those words, and And it's quite remarkable and such a tribute that you have such a large picture of her, very prominent in your
Well,
apartment.
this was made because, the story why we have the pictures is because, I was on the stage in Warsaw and
Right.
my mother never
Well,
moved.
let me just explain that because we didn't talk
Yeah.
about that yet. That you
Oh,
were really the Polish Shirley Temple. Your
right.
mother was the stage mom, right?
Yes.
And she brought you around, and you were quite famous in movies and on stage in
Right.
in Poland. So there was a time that you were separated from your sister, who
Yeah.
stayed with her grandparents in Przemysl. All those people in Gesher Galicia will know that town of Przemysl because that's where the archive is, where we have the identification project of many index books that people have found records of their ancestors on. And so your sister was living in Przemysl with your grandparents while you were with your mother in Warsaw
Correct.
on stage and screen
Right.
and was quite famous.
Actually, I used to recite poetry of two famous poets. One was Julian Tuwim, and the other one was Jan Brzechwa. They actually were Jews. They were baptized, I think, married Christians, I don't know. But I was in both of their houses because they liked the way I used to recite her poetry.
Right, right. Okay, now you said that you never thought very much about being Jewish until the war. You did realize that you were different from your other friends, though. You didn't go to church when your other friends did, and you, you really never thought very much about being Jewish until the war?
In the war or before?
Before.
So before the war, my family was kind of secular. We were Jews and we obeyed the big holidays like Passover, that my father. But the family wasn't very religious. So we didn't, my father had a lot of Ukrainians who worked for him on the land, and he had a lot of Poles, and he paid them well. And there was never anything that they would say, you dirty Jew. So, our life was, I had a Polish nanny, and, we lived kind of peacefully. There was never any trouble like that. So we couldn't say it because we didn't live in a ghetto or we didn't live in a big city. We just lived on land. So it was different.
Did your
A lot
parents
of
speak Yiddish?
No, my parents never spoke Yiddish, but my grandparents did, my
Did
mother's.
you understand it?
Yeah, I understood it as a child, sure.
Okay. Okay. Now, one thing that is very unique about Renia's diary is how it tells the story of both living in the Soviet occupation zone and then under the control of the Germans. I love the line that Renia wrote about the poor refugees making their way into the Soviet occupation zone and how they had to learn to admire the happy workers' paradise
Yeah.
while living in mud huts and being hungry and exhausted. That's a remarkable line that she wrote. And there was, it, you were in Przemysl when the war broke out, right?
It
Okay,
was summertime.
right. It's September 1st. And you with your grandfather and Renia walked from Przemysl to Lviv about
Yeah.
100 kilometers.
Yeah.
Your grandmother couldn't do that walk. Okay,
Grandma stayed home with the maid.
right. And the reason that they did that walk, you did that work, is because you were afraid of the arriving Germans. You didn't
Yes.
know at that time that you were going to be occupied by the Soviets.
Yeah. It was crazy.
It
It
was
was a mess. because it took us forever to get there. And then sometimes there would be some horses, and they gave us a little ride, on the way. So that's how we were walking in a little ride. And we went to this big field. It was a summertime, so it was, cut. My sister's legs were all messed up from, bleeding from the, cut of the wheat. And then we ended up in this forest. And, and when we were walking, they had this field of cabbage. And I think the Germans up there thought it was heads and they were bombing it. We escaped it somehow. We were in this forest, but it was a terrible situation.
Right. So, but then finally, the Soviets then came from the east and they set up occupation zones. Okay. And it turns out that your grandparents' hometown of Przemysl, the occupation zone line ran right across the town, according to the river, by the San River. So your grandparents' house was in the Soviet zone. You returned to that house, okay, but your mother was in Warsaw.
Yeah.
In the German occupation zone.
Right.
So there was no way for them to visit each other. And that had to be very difficult, especially for you, since you were a younger girl and you were living with your mother as she was your stage mom.
Right. I miss my mom. So did my sister. Missed her so much. You have no idea. But she was like a mom to me. She was older. My grandparents weren't so old, but they look old. I don't know, in their 60s.
Well, I think to a young child, the grandparents always look old. I think I look old to my granddaughters.
So my sister took care of me. She took care of me.
Yeah, right.
What I should wear, what I should say, what I should do,
So Renia wrote about this border, and she wrote so eloquently. She wrote, "In fact, it's a stupid border. What is it? People just put up stones and ram posts in, and say this is mine and that's yours. And what does it really mean?" I mean, that's so remarkable for a
young girl.
Right. And then a regulation was pronounced. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Okay. And then the Germans invaded Poland, invaded the Soviets, and all hell broke loose. Okay. Przemysl started to be bombed. But then the border through Przemysl of the occupation zones no longer existed, and your mother was able to visit. So that was one good thing that happened out of that. But then a regulation was pronounced that the Jews had to start wearing a Star of David armband.
Right.
Listen to how Renia described what that was like.
Yeah.
Today, I'm like everyone else. Tomorrow, along with other Jews, I'll have to start wearing a white armband. To you, I will always be the same Renia, a friend. But to others, I will be someone inferior. I will become someone wearing a white armband with a blue star. I will be a Yid. So, I mean, for a 16-year-old girl to write like that, I think is truly remarkable. And this is the value of the diary, in that it's one thing for someone to write a memoir many years later and say, "Oh, this is what it felt like to put the band on." But to write these words on the day before she had to put the band on really is a value to the reader, to get into the mindset of what it was like for a person living under those conditions, being told they had to start to wear a band. Yeah. Were you treated differently on the street by the non-Jews immediately after wearing the band?
I never wore the band.
You never had to wear the band?
I was too young. You had to be 12 years old.
Oh, I didn't know that. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that.
So
So
I
children were exempt from wearing the band?
what?
I don't think that was true across the whole occupation zone. Maybe in your town it was, but I don't think that was true across.
No, we
There are
didn't
a lot
have.
of pictures in the Warsaw ghetto that you see little children wearing the band.
Maybe didn't have to wear a band. That was not the rule. We had to, when you were 12, you had to start wearing it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know about Warsaw.
But
'cause
yeah,
I wasn't-
yeah, right. That's the point that Deborah Lipstadt was making. That when you're told to do something, you don't know who else is being told, where else they're being told that. Because you just know what's happening to you. You don't know what's happening to people
No.
in other areas.
We had no communication, you know.
Right. There was no internet. You couldn't go on the internet and check it out. Okay. Okay, and you were then forced into the ghetto with your grandparents.
Yeah.
And Renia wrote so movingly about that. It was July 16th, 1942. And this is what she writes. You probably want to know what a closed-off ghetto looks like. Pretty ordinary. Barbed wire all around, with guards watching the gates, a German policeman and a Jewish police. Leaving the ghetto without a pass is punishable by death.
Right.
Inside, there are only our people, close ones, dear ones. Outside, there are strangers. My soul is so very sad. My heart is seized with terror. Such is life. Now, do you remember what it was like for you, what you felt when you moved inside the ghetto?
So we were very lucky in a way because when a policeman came to my grandpa that we had to move to the ghetto, he smeared him a little money. And, you know, wie schmiert man so fährt man? So, yeah.
Yeah, we all know. We Galicianos know what schmear means.
So, you know, so we stayed in the house for another year. So we moved to the ghetto, only that I was there for 2 weeks.
Oh, you
And
only.
so we were lucky. We could only take 25 kilo with us. So what do you take from a house? Do you take what to cook, or you take your clothes or whatever? It was really something. So we moved, and Grandpa and Grandma, my sister and I, we had to rent another place. And well, we were just there a short time. I don't know where we even got the food. It was so difficult, my God. And Zygmunt must have paid off the guards because he took me out from the ghetto.
Yeah.
And he took my sister, his mother and father together out of the
Okay.
ghetto.
Let's get to the story of what Zygmunt did for Renia after. But I want. Why don't you tell us the story of how Zygmunt got you out of the ghetto and how you were reunited with your mother?
Oh, so he took my sister, his mother and father, to the brother of his mother, who was living outside because he was the head of the Judenrat. They were permitted to stay on the Aryan side, Moniuszko 10. He took me to my Polish girlfriend's father. I had a Polish girlfriend, Jitka Leszczyńska. They were just honored. My daughter did it. What was it?
Yad Vashem.
Yad Vashem. Because the grandchildren came, and the man from the Israeli, the ambassador came. They gave. I couldn't go because I don't go. And they took me to Leszczyński's apartment, where I stayed a week. If somebody knocked at the door, they hid me under the bed or closet or whatever. And then he, under the death penalty, took me to the railroad station. And he had 3 daughters. 2 were friends with my sister because they were in the gymnasium. The youngest was my friend from elementary school. She was my dear friend. And so he was a very good Christian, dear, very believing, you know. He took me to the railroad station, held my hand. Now, all I had with me was a little lunchbox that my grandpa gave me. And in the lunchbox, it was taped in the $20 gold coins. And he said to me, one day, if you have nothing, maybe you can sell it and you will have a little money if you don't have anything. So all I had was this little lunchbox and a coat and a little dress. That's it. And he took me by my hand. There was a Gestapo. There were dogs. There was God knows what not. Imagine how I felt. He held my hand and said, "This is my daughter." And we got on a train.
And you went on that train and you got off the train in Warsaw, and someone came up to you and said that little girl is a Jew.
Jewish girl.
You're hiding a Jew.
Yeah.
And that you said you wrote that you didn't have much memory of what happened, but you stood about 5 minutes. There must have been some threats made that your friend's father said, "I'm going to kill you if you do."
Yes.
But somehow he walked away.
You ran away.
He ran away.
Yeah.
He must have been.
You know, Leszczyński was very aristocratic-looking man with a nice mustache, a very nice-looking Pole. So this other guy that came was like a Scheigitz, you know, nothing. And he probably wanted some money or who knows. And so when Leszczyński hooked on him, he ran. And so he took me to Bereda family. And Bereda, she became my godmother in the church.
Right, because you were
She herself was a Jew.
your mom, who had already converted, then baptized you so you could hide on the Aryan side.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and that's how you were saved.
Yeah,
That's how you were saved. Now, Renia, rather, felt the end was coming near. Now, Renia seemed to be quite spiritual. She was, in her writing, she was pleading often to God to save us. Many times she would write Shema Yisrael to hear the call of these Jews who are suffering, for God to help her. And at the end of many entries in the diary, she would use the word for your mother, Bolish. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Bolish, and God will save us.
Right.
So
she was very spiritual.
She was very spiritual. And then, but she felt the end was, danger lying ahead, didn't know what the end was going to be for her. And she wrote while she was in the ghetto, "When I look, there is bloodshed, such terrible pogroms. There is killing, murdering. God Almighty, for the umpteenth time, I humble myself in front of you. Help us, save us, Lord God, let us live. I beg you, I want to live. I've experienced so little of life, nothing. I don't want to die. I'm scared of death." I mean, harrowing words for someone who felt the danger that she was in and being such a young girl. And I could just imagine what it was like for you to read those words in the diary so many years later.
I wasn't old enough to realize it, I think, myself. She was much older. She understood more the situation of what was going on than I did. I knew it was scary, but I didn't knew the depth of it.
Now, your father turned out to be a mysterious figure.
Yeah.
with not much known about what happened to him or
Right.
where he was during the war, but you do know that he lost his estate and he ended up in the ghetto in Horodenka. Okay.
Yes.
Elizabeth, you write in your notes that that this is what you write. My daughter Alexandra has tried all kinds of ways to uncover something about him. But when you don't have birthplaces and birth dates, and almost every piece of paper your family owned was destroyed in the war, finding your father's history is next to impossible. Alexandra, have you used professional genealogists in your search?
Um, we have talked to several. One was Yehuda Ecker, who did help us find relatives, actually. Some are in Brazil, and it's an upsetting story because it was somewhat my mother and her cousin were in a displaced persons camp at the same time in Germany. My mother ends up coming to the United States, and and her cousin ends up going to Israel. And I don't know if because my mother had a different name or they just didn't cross paths, but they never saw each other again.
My father's sister.
But we had someone who actually went to Poland, tried to go through all of these documents, and all we discovered that was that her father, his brothers, and their father somehow were able to stay in Tłuste, I think it was.
Yeah.
And they were on a train that was taking them to a camp, and they jumped from the train.
I don't know if they
But-
were alive.
But we don't know, where they ended up.
And
Okay.
that my father maybe died in Bergen-Belsen.
No, I think Belzec.
Okay. So that was a few years ago that you did the search. All right?
Yeah.
Let me tell you, there are always new records coming available. We have new stuff coming available to us from the Soviet occupation zone at Gesher Galicia that we're working on right now. Why don't you, after this podcast, send me an email with whatever you know about your father, and we'll try to see if we could
We
find
really don't know much about it.
No, I can
Well,
send you
his name,
She knows.
approximate date of birth. You don't know when he was born, where his parents' names. Do you know your father's parents' names?
and
Henry's and Salcha. That's all I know. I don't know where he was
Okay, well,
born.
that's something. Well, just send me whatever you know, and we'll see what we could do for you.
Oh,
Okay. Okay. Now, Alexandra, you didn't know for a while that your mother was even Jewish, right? What was it like for you, and how old were you when you found out when your mother actually confessed her story that she was a Holocaust survivor and that she was Jewish, although she was married? Your father was Jewish and her husband was Jewish, and he didn't know.
yeah, I have something of a Madeleine Albright story. I don't think I knew until about the age of 12. I thought I knew she was Catholic. I knew my father was Jewish, but he was secular, and we weren't terribly religious people to begin with. So I wasn't really enmeshed in any religious world. And it's interesting because my mother baptized my brother and I. And she can also tell you that when she came to this country, the people that sent the affidavit of support
you were Jewish.
were very wealthy Jews. They lived in New Rochelle. They had a beautiful house. They had a maid. And here was my mother coming from war-torn Europe with very little. And they said to her in 1946 America, they don't like the Jews here. So don't change your name. And they didn't. And I think her mother felt that the Catholic religion saved them. So in essence, she felt the same, and she baptized my brother and I.
My mother wanted that. I did it.
But what was it like for you at 12 years of age to all of a sudden find out that, your whole
I was
thought of
confused.
the identity of your mother is completely different?
I was confused, and it wasn't until years later that I understood these traumatizing situations for Holocaust survivors. They repressed their feelings. They didn't want to discuss their past. And I'm not religious now. And I don't think there's any one way to be Jewish. I think there are different paths, different ways to accept it culturally. But it sensitized me as a person because now I was connected to this bigger story and this horrible catastrophe. So it was traumatizing for me too in a different way.
I
Right.
definitely don't want Jews to be killed.
Right. Now, what was it like for your husband to find out that he was married to a Jew after he thought all these years he was married to a Catholic?
Well, only a few years, you know.
Oh, okay.
He didn't know. He didn't even care.
Okay.
His family wasn't very religious either, the Viennese Jews. They were
Right.
Jews, but, I don't know. I don't
Okay.
think was George circumcised.
Why are you asking me?
Okay, we're not going to get into
No, he
that.
was, but I don't know if he had a bar mitzvah. I never asked him.
Okay. Now, the diary has been published in, you said, how many languages?
23.
It's
23
coming out in
languages.
Hebrew this year.
And it's been well received every place it's been published. Now, has the reception in Poland, I understand, has been very welcoming and warming. But is it different? Is the reception in Poland different than it has been in other places to the diary?
Well, they're going to teach it now. They got $100,000 in the Galicia Museum.
Galicia Jewish Museum.
Yeah.
And they're partners of Gesher Galicia, where we work closely with them.
Right. They came here to interview me in Polish, and they made 8 vignettes. And they are going to now teach the teachers. They ask us for permission, I don't know. And they're going to teach the children in the school about my sister.
In the public schools of Poland, they're going to be
Public
reading.
school.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Public school. That comes from Galicia Museum in Krakow.
In Przemysl, has anything been done about, like, have there been any publicity about where Renia lived with the grandparents, where she went to
So
the
there was an exhibit that was at the Galicia Jewish Museum in Krakow. There was a 3-room exhibit dedicated to Renia and Zygmunt, the diary, their story. And they are the exhibit is now traveling throughout Poland, and they hope to bring it to Przemysl by September and maybe eventually bring it here to the United States.
Wow, that would be wonderful. Oh, please.
And what trouble is, we lived in a building. Next door was a Casa Horis, which means
Where?
no, it was for the sick people. And then there was a synagogue. And in front of the synagogue, there was a little space. So we got a call from the guy from Przemysl, who was a mayor. And at first I talked to him Polish, but guess what? He spoke English well because he spent 7 years in Ireland. So they were wanting to buy it from the Jewish Foundation, that part, the synagogue, and wanted to make a square in my sister's name.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But they don't have enough money because the Jews want 6 million zloty. They only give them 2 million. So we're going to try to maybe need a little money so they can negotiate for middle,
And they made a documentary film in Poland about the story, right?
Yes. It was called Broken Dreams. And my mother basically makes the story because she's a professional actress and she sings, she plays the piano, she recites poetry, and it was beautifully done.
Is that available with English subtitles at anywhere?
It was shown at the United Nations. The director still has copies of it. He probably would consider showing it somewhere.
Okay, because you know what? We at Gesher Galicia could host that on our website.
He
If
doesn't
that's
talk to us now.
That's a whole other story,
oh,
side
okay,
story,
okay,
but yes, it exists with subtitles in English.
okay. So
I
let's
don't.
finish. So,
He never gave it to me. No.
uh, what to you is the legacy of Renia's diary? And what legacy do you believe and wish we could all take from it and treasure from it?
Well, I say always to the young people, look, people go to the synagogue, they pray. They go to the mosque, they pray. They go to Catholic church, they pray. They all pray to God, and then they fight over it all the time and kill each other. Why never a little love instead of hate all the time?
Amen. Amen. Well, that sums it up very well, and that shows very much in your sister's writings in the
Well,
diary.
she wanted the world to be good. She didn't like the hatred.
How I urge all listening or watching to read the book, read her words, read the remarkable writing of this teenage girl for what going through the horrors that she was going through, and we have to remember that we actually didn't get to that she was hiding out in her boyfriend's uncle's attic with the boyfriend's parents, and some townsperson informed to the Germans that there were Jews hiding in the attic. And just like that, as Zygmunt said, 3 bullets, and these 3 people were gone. And it's such a shame. It's just such a shame that this happened to so many of 6 million. And this is recorded the day after Yom HaShoah, when we've been recording and memorizing these wonderful people of ours who never got a chance to live their full life. And I
Only
want to,
young people can help the world. The young people have to understand, like my sister, they have to open eyes and see, try to love each other, help each other, not hate each other.
right, right. Well, I want to thank you. You're a remarkable storyteller like your sister. I wish you only the best. Keep in touch with us, okay? We could help you in your family research or in anything about the story, the movie that you might have, okay? And wishing you only good life and sei gesund till a
That
hundred
you don't.
till 120.
Yeah,
120.
120. Yeah. Well, we want to thank you so much for inviting us. We appreciate your effort, and we really hope to see you one day.
That would be my pleasure. That would be my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Danke.